He is a candidate for the United States Senate, running on the Independent American Party ticket. He's running to replace Senator Mitt Romney. The Republicans unfortunately decided to nominate a Democrat for their nominee, John Curtis. He's about as big a Democrat as there is, and at least inside the Republican Party. Anyway, Carlton was born and raised in Utah, married to beautiful Linda Bowman. They have 6 children and 14 grandchildren. Carlton served with distinction in the United States Air Force from 1988 to 1994. He has degrees in economics and imagery and intelligence analysis. Carlton and Linda are faithful members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They currently reside in American Fork. Carlton recognizes and appreciates the benefit that faith and religion from the multiple denominations bring to our society. Carlton was elected to the American Fork City Council, where he served from 2014 to 2018, voting against unconstitutional spending at the local level. Carlton sponsored and passed resolutions recognizing Constitution Day for American Fork City. Please welcome with me Carlton Bowen, candidate for the United States Senate.
Thank you, Lane. And let's hear it for David Gillie, too. I hope you win, David. I hope that you put the means from this to good use, because elections are so critical. It's basically self-government. If we don't control our elections and have honest and fair elections, we really don't have self-government anymore. Well, I appreciate that introduction, Lane. I am Carlton Bowen, running to replace Mitt Romney. I'm for the U.S. Constitution. I'll be on your ballot in November in Utah. And I'm running on a platform of traditional values, traditional money, and our tradition of freedom. And traditional values, what does that mean? It's so simple and basic, it's almost silly that we even have to talk about it, but we're at a place in our country where we do have to talk about and promote traditional values. So boys are boys, girls are girls. In other words, there's only 2 genders. Marriage is between a man and a woman. And families matter a lot. And ideally have a mom and a dad, married, trying, and true. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, don't kill. Honesty and integrity still matter. Traditional money, what does that mean? Well, it means more than using the gold and silver coin that our founders envisioned and that the Constitution still requires. It also means a free market capitalist economic system. Not crony capitalism, not socialism, not communism, a true free market with a level playing field, whether you're big or small, where consumers, not the government, chooses the winners and losers. It also means fiscal responsibility, with lowering the national debt, not increasing the debt ceiling limit, and having balanced annual budgets with regular order in the U.S. House. In other words, no more continuing resolutions. And my slogan is break the uniparty. And when it comes to the money, both parties actually collude to always have more debt, to always have more spending. That's something we need to stop. Our tradition of freedom, this is something that's actually very unifying. It's something we all share as Americans. Our country was founded by people seeking religious freedom and economic opportunity. So the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth in 1620, fleeing religious persecution in Europe and seeking religious freedom in America. The Jamestown settlers settled in 1607, seeking better economic opportunity. We declared our independence on July 4th, 1776, but we had to fight for 5 years our War of Independence to actually win it. And in all of these things, God is the author of our liberty. Those original colonies in Plymouth and Jamestown, they would not have survived without God's help. The miracle of the Indian that spoke English that could help the Plymouth settlers. because he had actually been to England and learned English and then happened to be back right where they landed because of the earlier 1607 Jamestown settlers. And it was only after these colonies jettisoned kind of their socialist ideas of common ownership and embraced private property that they actually began to take root and flourish in this new country. The Revolutionary War is full of miracles. Most people are familiar with Washington's crossing of the Delaware, how the fog came up, how Washington miraculously was able to march through New York, which was the Loyalist hotbed. A lot fewer people are aware of the miracle of the last battle of the Revolution, the Battle of Yorktown. So a lot of people don't realize that the British had multiple ships filled with reinforcements waiting off the coast of Virginia, arriving at Yorktown, Virginia, right when a huge storm came up, which prevented them from landing those reinforcements, and that storm persisted day after day after day, until Cornwallis was finally forced to surrender on Surrender Field in Yorktown, Virginia, which was a beautiful sunny day. God is the author of our liberty. Our national motto is in God we trust, and indeed we must, if we are to remain a free and prosperous nation. So these are the principles that I'll vote according to. I'm very familiar with the Constitution. I've read it multiple times. Obviously, that guides how you vote. I've taken a note to the Constitution twice. I've honored that oath. Once in the U.S. military, once on the American Board City Council, where, as it was mentioned, I voted against unconstitutional legislation. And are there any questions? I don't think I have a lot of time, but maybe I could take one question. Yes?
So I was in the Air Force as well, and the Army.
Awesome.
What did you do in the Air Force?
So I was an imagery analyst. I was in the intelligence career field.
And how do you think that would help you?
Well, I mean, in lots of ways. I'm familiar with what the government should and shouldn't do. When I was in the military, a lot of the stuff the military is doing today we were explained to was specifically against the law. Like, for example, in imagery, there were strict rules against imaging the continental United States. It could only be done for training purposes, and it was unclassified imagery. Since 9/11, we've embraced a police state, basically a police state mentality, with the forming of the Department of Homeland Security, which consolidated multiple federal agencies which previously were separate and independent. You didn't have airport screenings, and to date, the TSA still has not foiled a single terrorist plot, according to what I understand. Congress has brought this up multiple times too, and they've been in operation for 20 years. We don't need the TSA to be safe on flights. So I'd like to now turn the time over to David Gillie. Thank you very much. I hope you'll grab a yard sign and consider supporting me.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to let you know, I have known David for only a few months. I was quite disappointed that no one filed to run for county clerk except for a 24-year-old young man that the only job he's ever had was working for the previous county clerk for about a year and a half, and then he bailed and said he wanted to work for Mitt Romney. And I thought, well, okay, but Romney wasn't hiring. What he didn't know was Romney was not going to run again for the United States Senate. Anyway, I met David a few months ago, and I encouraged him to run for the county clerk position. He is retired from the military, but it's kind of a legal retirement, he told me. He's still working at the cheese plant, right? Slice of cheese, but he's very well versed in the Constitution, and I think he understands the duties of the clerk. And I'm going to turn the time to David Gillie.
Hey, stand up, Ken. You work at Guzzlers too. Probably just like me, a little extra retirement money. What a wonderful organization. My next door neighbor, Jim Little, worked for how many years, Jim? At Guzzlers? 37 years. That's longer than I served in the Navy. It was 30 years in a month. What a wonderful organization. I am the first American citizen in my family. I am passionately, some people say obnoxiously American. I am the only person you've met, and I hope that will not always be the case, who has memorized the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States and all the amendments. As I've taught civics in 10 states around the country, I always encourage my audience to take that challenge. Begin, learn the Declaration, then let that inspire you. Isn't that true, Brad? Then let that inspire you to take on the much more difficult task of the Constitution, and then the more difficult task of the amendments. If we do not know our fundamental law, then we are bastard sons of forgotten fathers. And I fear that we have become bastard sons of forgotten fathers. And in the world of causation, there are approximate causes and there are ultimate causes and causes in between. And if you look and read history enough, you will realize that the ultimate cause for the loss of the free country is the loss of the American. The peculiar creature called an American, who alone can sustain that remarkable thing that we call American self-government. There never was an America before, because there never were Americans before. Our Heavenly Father, who is the author of liberty, began creating Americans back as far as 450, when he started creating the Englishmen and bringing certain tribes from the Germanic mainland to the British Isles and leaving all the rest. And over several hundred years, he shaped that thing that is called an Englishman, which was a remarkable thing that had never been seen before in the civic history of the world. And then through the English Civil War, he went to the final stage of creating something that he'd never created before, and that was the American. And it took him about 150 years on these coasts to create a people, the only people in written history willing to ascribe to a series, a syllogism of 5 truths about men, God, and governments and the relationships between them that no other people before or since has been willing to nail its identity to. The truths, after all, are self-evident. Any honest, intelligent human being will accede that they are true, but only an American will stake his existence on them, will put his hand there and unanimously declare, this is who we are, and we're willing to die to defend these truths. As that unique creature has become increasingly scarce, I argue that's the ultimate cause for the vanishing of a free country. So we have a lot of repentance to do, a lot of re-knowing, and re-ascribing, and having the courage to work out the implications in our mind. Bring that down to the practical, county clerk. I moved here 4 years ago. I was dismayed to find that we had pretend voting. By pretend voting, I mean what many other states are doing now in the Union the last 15 or 20 years. Mail me a ballot. Sure. How many are going to mail to my neighbor? I don't know. I'll put it in a box. Who else will put things in a box? I don't know. You're not going to read it? You're going to feed it to a machine. Oh, okay. So what algorithms are in that machine to multiply or divide or flip or do anything else? Oh, I don't know. Oh, I'm not allowed to know. Oh, the clerk is not allowed to know. Oh, no one's allowed to know. It's in statute. Well, that's a crazy statute. For a couple of thousand years, Western civilization has known in various cultures, first Greece, then Roman, through the Middle Ages, and others have known how to vote. There are a few simple principles. One is you do it by precinct, face to face. Who knows in your precinct? Who knows how many precincts in Cache County? There's 166 of them. Because the ratio of population to precincts, that means there are never more than about 400 people in your precinct. People who, there you go. So you know them, you meet them, you live near them. We've done this for thousands of years in Western civilization and a couple hundred years in our civilization. It's not hard, it's simple, it's straightforward, and it's honest. And the most important thing about it is that as we do it, Together, we inspire each other with confidence in ourselves and each other as citizens. And we learn self-respect and respect for each other as citizens. That's crucial. This state has a wonderful history of doing self-government. Self-government is something you do with fellow citizens, not to fellow citizens. When we were the provisional state of Deseret, in 1849, through the General Assembly, we adopted a very simple 3 1/3 page law outlining how we were going to vote together in our precincts, and we were all going to watch the voting and the counting, the judging, and the reporting together, and so instill confidence in ourselves and each other and respect for ourselves and for each other. When we became the territory of Utah a few years later, took us 3 2/3 pages to do roughly the same thing. And 50 years later, when we became a state, Congress's Enabling Act, Section 119 of that act, simply carried over the election law of the territory of Utah as the election law of now the state of Utah. Somewhere along the line, much of it in just the last few decades, we went amok. We allowed our public servants in both houses of the legislature to come up with a monstrosity. I would call it a blasphemy. I would call it something horrendous. Of 743 pages, 228,433 words. I defy anyone, I've yet to meet anyone who's read it all. I've been working my way assiduously through it, and it's enough, it's very punishing. I defy anyone to look at me in the eye and tell me, yeah, I believe that is designed to do what this did. What this did, it's not. Your county clerk, however, is under statutory obligation to administer this obscenity as it stands. But because he or she is in charge of elections, he or she has a wonderful opportunity in the holy pulpit to persuade his fellow citizens and the county council and the state legislature to take a number of steps from this back to something like this. Something that is honest, something that is straightforward, something that inspires trust and confidence and respect amongst and for and with each other. That allows us to do citizenship with each other again and not to each other. The first step of that, I've mentioned before, is the clerk needs to let everybody know that the statute right now, the very last clause here, allows you to opt out of a mail-in ballot and say, no thank you, I'd rather vote in a polling place. That's only the first step. The law says for every 5,000 of us that do that, the clerk is obliged by statute to open another polling place. But even when the 65,000 roughly voting citizens of this county do that, that will only create 13 polling places. We need to create 166, but that's the first step. The next step is to persuade our state legislators to get us out of error, which is a sharing agreement between ourselves and several other states and some nonprofits. And the information they share, the voting information they share with those people, including nonprofits, exceeds what we share with ourselves as citizens by statute. The next step is to get on our way to getting back to real voting in our precincts on paper ballots, watching it happen, looking each other in the eye, 2 election judges appointed each election cycle, sworn to oversee it, but anyone who wants to can watch the casting, the canvassing, the counting, and the reporting. And at the deepest level, I believe that is an obligation that you and I have to each other. That's why I'm doing this. We need to repent of our neglect of each other in our duties to each other as citizens. I think this is one of the greatest areas of our neglect. It's kind of like a husband and wife living together and ceasing to do all those things together that are important, and eventually inhabiting the same space, but not really being in one bond together. And that's kind of where we are on the verge of a civil war, and that's because we've neglected our relationships with each other. So anyway, I thank you all. I thank Ricky. I thank Alan. I thank John. I thank Ralph. All of you that made this possible. I thank every one of you for being here, for helping with this effort. It's going to be a difficult effort. So please stand and see it through, because it's going to be difficult and punishing. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's now our privilege to listen to Dr. Scott Bradley. Scott has been, I've known Scott for, 30 years or so, probably, something like that. Anyway, Scott is a constitutional scholar. He's written several books. He does presentations all over the place. He was a candidate for the vice presidency of the United States a few years back. U.S. Senate candidate a few years back. Anyway, Scott's going to talk to us about our responsibilities as citizens and for election integrity and how that ties into the Constitution. So, Scott, come take it away.
Well, as it was mentioned by me, I'm a three-time loser when it comes to running for office. One of the least popular figures that has ever graced the election process. But my message has never, ever changed. I used to be on the radio very regularly down there, talk radio down in KNU. And one time Jason said to me, Bradley, he says, you are so predictable. I love having you on the program. And I says, you know why I'm predictable? Because the principles never change. You guys can shape them and move them and do whatever you want with them. But if you stick with the principles, you're pretty predictable. And that's what we're trying to do. When I come to events like this, I'm kind of touched by a Norman Rockwell-ish kind of, I don't know if it's an aura or something, where Americans that care about governance and principles, they get a chance to get together. And I think about how Rockwell oftentimes, through whether it's the doctor's office or in a church or something like that, he showed Americana. He was magnificent at capturing it. But one of the ones I love most of all is one where there's some American citizens in a public setting expressing their interest in preserving the blessings of liberty. You don't know what they're saying, but they're earnest. They're a little bit warm, like most of us, I think. They're not polished and the elite or anything like that, but they believe and they feel something. And we rarely feel that anymore in America, sadly. We rarely feel that spirit of liberty. And without taking the time to explain that feeling, a woman talked to me some time ago about something she felt in a presentation we had made. And she told me something happened. Something happened. I said, what? She says, well, my father was crying. He was over too bad. Her son, who was 17, was crying. And she was crying. She says, something happened. And I said, well, did you feel something? She says, yes. And I said, did you feel it right here? And she said, yes. And I said, really? She said, what was it? I said, it was the spirit of liberty. She said, the spirit of liberty. She said, now what do I do? And that's kind of where we are in America today. We rarely ever feel that spirit anymore. We have so much acrimony. We have so many voices calling out. Some crying low here and others low there. You might have heard that statement before. And yet and still, the nation's adrift. And so when we come to some of these things, we have three candidates here tonight. You just heard from David from Carlton. Don't see him. There's Carlton back. Jeff Osler has a table up here too. He's running for a state office, the state auditor. And you've heard David and Carlton tell a little bit about their perspective. And Jeff, I think, is firmly convinced that Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution needs to be focused on. That's the proper money and the contract things that the states are in total violation of. We have a very terrible, awful situation going on right now in this state. But what I'm going to talk about is going to take all the levels of government in cooperation one with another. The county can't fix it. They can try, and they can work on it. They got to be devoted to it. The state, federal governments can't fix it. It's a collaborative effort. And I'm glad to see what we have today is a citizen-driven effort to include public and private virtue. Those are things we rarely see or hear about. Washington said in his inaugural address that his dedication to public and private virtue was going to drive his administration. We need to return to that. We don't need to seek for power, aggrandizement, or some kind of status in a government, but to bring about the things of the public servant again. No longer the idea of, look at me, look at me. Every time you run for office, you kind of wonder what it's really about, and it's usually about power or aggrandizement or some kind of emolument. There's a spirit of party nowadays, and that was completely foreign to the American founders. They abhorred it, and they sought to prevent it. But that seems to drive everything that's happening nowadays. We have people today here running for office, I guess I should say, rather than from office, running for office from different political alignments. But they're all principles-based, and I think that's really something. A principles-based motivation and intention is something we so desperately need right now. You know, that's the kind of thing the Electoral College was based upon. And I wish there was time to review the 68th Federalist paper with you. I feel quite comfortable doing that. That's the paper that Hamilton talked about the Electoral College. It will be attacked, and there will be a tremendous effort to get rid of it. It was probably the sole element of the Constitution of 1787 that received no complaints, complete total acclamation by everybody. It was the right thing. A single-purpose legislature that would be beyond the political reach. We're going to see that destroyed here pretty quick, too. Well, I got so much I'd love to tell you. But political parties have been the bane of the nation, and I won't take the time to do that. But I'll tell you one thing. I was going to tell you a little bit about what Washington talked about in his farewell address, but time won't allow all of these things to happen. But here's what Noah Webster said would happen if we got that party spirit, if we got, founding fathers coined the term secret combinations. You think that's in another setting. It wasn't. It was in common usage early in this nation. So were priestcrafts too, by the way. They coined that term. But what Noah Webster, one of the American founding fathers, said, listen to this. Ask yourself, heart of hearts, is this where we are in America today? And I'd say, yeah, we probably are. He said, God commands you to choose for rulers just men who will rule in the fear of God. The preservation of a republican government, we're going to talk about republics in just a minute, depends on the faithful discharge of this duty. If the citizens neglect their duty and place unprincipled men in office, the government will soon be corrupted. Laws will be made not for the public good, so much as for selfish or local purposes. Corrupt or incompetent men will be appointed to execute the laws. The public revenues will be squandered on unworthy men, and the rights of the citizens will be violated or disregarded. In your heart of hearts, is that day upon us right now? It is, sadly, tragically. And we have allowed that to happen as the keepers of the principles the nation was founded on. Well, so here we are. The Republic was started by the American founders. It's for the general government and all the other governments. It's required in Article 4 of the United States Constitution. Everything's a republic, and in spite of and notwithstanding that every single stinking politician nowadays calls it a democracy. I can't watch the State of the Union address anymore because I get just distracted. I start stroke tallying the times they talk about democracy. And pretty soon I quit listening and I'm just watching the pep rally with the number of democracies they mentioned. It's not. It never has been. So at any rate, a republic in America is that we elect trusted representatives that fulfill the assignment they've been given within the limits and bounds established by the Constitution. In Utah, it's the Utah Constitution and the United States Constitution. So, the Constitution is, I'll just take another definition from our friend Noah Webster. The Constitution is a system of fundamental rules, principles, and ordinances for the government of a state or nation. The Constitution is paramount to the statutes or laws enacted by the legislature, limiting and controlling its power. And in the United States, the legislature is created and its power is designated by the Constitution. What does paramount mean? It means it's superior to it. It's eminent. It's of the highest order. It is the chief or highest in rank. So, no trusted representative that we put in office has the authority to overstep the bounds that are constitutionally established. No one, no matter how big their mandate is that when they get elected to office, may overstep. And they were so serious about that they required an oath to be taken for every single person that holds office. Carlton mentioned he had taken that when he went in the military. I did too. It's different now than it was then. It's a sad scenario, honestly, where things are allowed that they take precedence with things that the people at the head of the government have strayed far, and those that are taking oaths of office no longer abide by them. We have become, as the scriptures talk about, a kind of an oath-breaking people. Well, there's checks and balances. And Thomas Jefferson and James Madison collaborated on the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. And they talked about limits and bounds in government. And this is very important for us to see. And time flies as we're having fun, as you might say. But here's what they said. The several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government, but that by a compact under the style and title of the Constitution of the United States and of amendments thereto, they constituted a general government for special purposes, delegated to that government certain definite powers, reserving each state to itself the residuary mass of right to their own self-government, and that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. It would be a dangerous delusion were a confidence in the men of our choice to silence our fears for the safety of our rights. That confidence is everywhere the parent of despotism. Free government is founded on jealousy and not in confidence. It is jealousy and not confidence which prescribes limited constitutions to bind down those whom we are obliged to trust with power that our Constitution has accordingly fixed the limits to which and no further our confidence may go. In questions of power, then, let no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. So, each of us is looking for a trusted representative. Each of us is looking for someone that is willing to uphold their oath of office that they will take when they get that office, to keep their actions within the limits and bounds established constitutionally. They may not stray beyond those, as Jefferson and Madison said. An oath is a solemn appeal to God. And if you look at the definition the Founding Fathers used, it imprecates the vengeance of God if they fail to live up to that oath. They're inviting the vengeance of God. And it's a deep, deep, solemn event when they take that oath. Well, interestingly, the United States Constitution delegates to the states the responsibility to run their elections. In Article 1, Section 4, it's very specific And it's basically the only time the federal government was intended to interfere in the election process was when states, now admit it, you got to understand the fragile alliance that happened with the states in 1787. They weren't so sure this new Constitution was going to be the cat's meow that we should think it is. And they were concerned that sometimes the states say, you know what, we're not going to elect a House of Representatives or send anybody to the Senate this time around. And so they reserved to the federal government to intervene to say, no, you've got to send enough to have a quorum here for us to do business at the general government level. So that was basically the power they had. Well, in every action since then, the general government has usurped the power of the election. And I wrote down the amendments 14, 15, 19, 24, 26, and then there's other actions that have been taken, including the 1965 Voting Rights Bill and 5 subsequent amendments to that. In every single instance, the power over the election is being encroached upon by the general government. And what has happened is that Congress has been encroaching constantly in the ability to hold our elections. Now, some of them have been done by amendment, so they have some pretty big power here. But what's happened is they've been encouraging and moving towards a computer-driven process for our elections. And I think that it came to a perfect storm in 2020. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes. But they have been building that since about the last 22 years. And they have encouraged the states to go to a computer-driven process for elections. And we'll talk a little bit about the problems associated with that just very shortly. But the fact of the matter is, they don't always just say, you know what, we're going to force you guys to do this. They say, we'll send you money to do this. And people sell their heritage for a mess of pottage. That's been going on for thousands of years. And so, well, they say, well, you know, you didn't have to do that. But in Utah, we did. We didn't have to, but we did. We embraced it immediately and wholeheartedly. We bought the machines. And then later on, they sent money and said, why don't you do a mail-in product? Okay, yeah, we'll do the mail-in stuff. And that's what's been happening. Cache County and Utah were early adopters of that process. Our state is at the very bleeding edge, not just leading edge, of a lot of things. The United Nations stuff that's going on in Utah is appalling based upon our leadership here in this state. But Congress is buying compliance by grants. And we sign up for it. Free money? Are you kidding me? If it's free, take 2. That's our way of doing it. We're going to see things happen like this in the destruction of the Electoral College and so on too. But for about 220 years, we carried out elections when we had peaceful transfer of power through a manual process of local elections and the use of paper ballots. Okay, so the voting's been honest, honorable, accurate, and outcomes are both sacred and essential in the survival of the nation and the peaceful transfer of power. We have seen slight hints of how the peaceful transfer of power is a very fragile thing. And we're in deep trouble right now because the election process has been called into question. Okay, so let's just spend a few minutes, and all I've got is a few minutes, talking about the historical perspective of paper ballots. Okay, on an appointed day and time, voters gathered within a voting precinct. It's been mentioned that was 1,000 voters. That's what Utah law says. If you've got 1,000 voters in a geography, that's a voting precinct, okay? And they were there to physically cast their vote. The voting judges were both known to the people who were coming in to vote, and the voters were known by the judges because they were selected out of your neighborhood. They walked in and they said to me, hi, Scott, how's it going? How are your grandkids today? Whatever, you know. That's how it's been. And we knew them and how their orchard was growing and everything else because they were our neighbors. And they could ascertain and then confirm that the voter presenting himself was truly a legal voter. The voter is given a paper ballot. The voter retires to a privacy booth and marks their ballot. The voter returns to the voting judge, and a paper ballot is immediately placed in the secure lockbox, a ballot box. And at the end of the voting time, the ballots are physically examined and counted under the watchful eye of individuals from the perspective and with the respective stakeholders, candidates, overseeing the effort to assure there's no chicanery that happens. So let's say this is being counted by the judges, and there's representatives from the different parties or candidates that are observing this. Wait. How did you count that last ballot? It could be called into question immediately and instantaneously resolved. Okay? Controversies are immediately resolved. All parties observe. The results are certified and are tabulated. The ballots are retained in case questions arise later. And all this happens with all precincts concurrently. The ballot box closes at 7 or 8 or whatever the time is. Everybody immediately begins the counting process. The results are then forwarded to be rolled up to the counting that goes up higher. And this compounding tabulation, there's always human eyes watching it. Competing judgments are involved to assure that open, honest, accurate results are ultimately obtained. Certification is occurring at every level. And at the end of that, both the winners and the losers can say, that's the way the cookie crumbles. Or woo-woo! Because everybody can say, I saw it happen. It was open, honest, and fair. And closure is brought to the election. Peaceful transfer occurs until the next time they have the opportunity to go through this Americanist process. Okay, so the idea of the modern methodology, all these confidences are lost. Universally, there are mailed out ballots. Again, Cache County was probably one of the first areas of the nation that adopted this when this opportunity came. Cache County, I personally had heartburn over this. I personally expressed that heartburn. Nobody gave a hang, okay? They're mailed out without face-to-face confirming identities and eligibility. The responses are mailed in. There's consolidated gathering points of ballots. There's automated tabulation without full disclosure. There's possibilities of software election altering algorithms out there. There's hacking, even foreign powers intervening. It could be anything or any number of challenges. But nope, they don't care. These factors all cause the confidence level to be diminished. And controversy is fostered. And if you push the retabulation button, guess what? You're going to get the same answer. This is a super example of garbage in, garbage out. It can never give you a different answer than it gave you before. Oh, we verified it. Most honest, secure election in the history of the world. Really? Okay, well. You know what? It's interesting. Every election, from the most local to the President of the United States, was carried out for about 220 years using the process of the paper ballot that we just discussed. And you know what? Sometimes under this formula, the counting went late into the night. It just had to. I don't ask for a show of hands because you'd be admitting you're about I know Steve's older than I am. But some of us remember the Kennedy-Nixon election. The counting went way into the night and into the early morning hours. But guess what? They came to a conclusion. They were paper ballots. They didn't have computers. Done. It was counted and sent up the ladder, and counted and sent up the ladder. And so even on these massive scales of presidential elections, it happened. And closure was brought before the next 24 hours started from the opening of the ballot boxes. Okay? So, about 22 years ago, voting machines and computer tabulation appeared on the scene. They promised a quick, accurate, verifiable, and replicable tabulation. But it wasn't long before some clever computer geeks, most of them a lot younger than anybody in this audience, figured out that this stuff is hackable. It's something that they can interfere with. And we watched for very, very amazing. These people were able to do stuff that those of us that are not familiar with computers just shake our heads. Well, they can also put software algorithms into the whole process, buried in the depth of the bowels of some computer that apply voting at different applications. They deny it, but it's a fact. We have watched these things happen. Okay, so concerns get voiced by voters. They're deflected, denied, and ignored. And Utah and our county, in Cache County, became some of the earliest adopters of this process that is so open to challenges. Well, pretty soon we evolved to universal policies to mail out ballots to all potential voters, ballot collection locations widely distributed. We had these things about security vulnerability concerns that some of us talked about. And the administrators of the voting process have extended the voting period to a full month now. Talk about quick and accurate results. Holy cow. Mailing postmarks and mail routings bring into question whether or not a vote was counted or should be counted or whether or not. It's a slow death by election. And we go on and on with the machinations that have really caused a great deal of concern to be called into question about our election process. And then we get the COVID con. That's what I call it. 2020, perfect storm. Every single thing we've talked about was magnified by this perfect wave. And all across the nation, every voting area has experienced what has just been pointed out in a kind of a very brief way. An unresolved election turmoil continues even today. We're talking 4 years later. And we're all still, quite maybe not everybody, some people have drank the Kool-Aid or Gatorade or, whatever kind of aid it was. And by the way, remember that Hillary Clinton's campaign was the first group that brought up election tampering and fraud issues in 2016, even before the COVID con of 2020. So both major parties have had heartburn over this. This should be a no-brainer for any party to say, you know what, we did something so successfully for 220 years. This nonsense that we've come up in the last couple of dozen years has caused us no end of grief. So, we have a corrupting smear going on our elections. And those of us that realize, I can't tell, I've spent 50 years plus talking around the country about people and to people about the founding principles of this nation. I cannot tell you how many times someone in the audience has brought up, I have a comment, basically it comes to this: it's time for a revolution. I'm going to get my M16, they say, and run up and down the street shooting windows out, or whatever, And I say, no, we can fix this. And all these years I've been telling them we have two things that can correct this. One is the vote, and the other is the Constitution. There are safeguards built into this that we can have a peaceful transfer of power, and it can continue. Now, in the last number of years, my arguments have grown rather thin, I've got to admit. Our Constitution is being ignored wholeheartedly. I do some hours of radio program every week, and last Friday I had a couple of hours of radio with somebody that is normally pretty sound in their thinking. And yet and still they had a cramp in their brain or something about something that came up, and suddenly they wanted to violate the Constitution. I said, wait. without going into all the details of why and what happened, it's astounding to me how many people that are normally pretty sound thinkers are having difficulty connecting the dots. And if they're having difficulty connecting the dots, I absolutely guarantee that the general populace of uninformed and uneducated and uncaring and complicit Americans, we could probably add a lot of other adjectives to that, but I guarantee we're in trouble. People do not understand constitutional limits, and people certainly are being deceived into an electoral nightmare that Utah has been on the absolute leading edge of. And it's something we've got to take and go back and correct. You know what? A lot of the people that are in favor of this talk about convenience. Oh, I can fill it out in the privacy of my own home and send it back in. Holy cow. You know what? It's so hard, I know, to drag your butt out of your house down to a voting area, walk in and vote and walk out. You cannot delegate certain things that are absolutely essential for our continued freedom. You know, I think about, I'm kind of a different kind of geek than a computer geek. I like to be where things happened. I risked my life one rainy night in Boston to stand on the exact location of the Boston Massacre. It's a 5-way intersection. It was a rainy night. Cars are going by at 40 to 60 miles an hour, and I'm out in the middle of the street. I'm here. This is where it happened. I love to do those things. I love to stand by the graves of those that signed the great founding documents of this nation. I like to visit the buildings they were in. And I like, sadly, it causes me tears oftentimes to stand by the unmarked graves of those that were at Valley Forge. I've done that. They don't know who's buried there. God does. We don't have a marker that says John Smith, you know, so-and-so, such and such. There's no markers there. They lost thousands of men at Valley Forge. And Valley Forge was not a ballot that you could mail in. The sufferings, the sacrifice, the efforts, the devotion, the last full measure of devotion, you cannot mail that in. We have such a terrible, arduous task of going down and balloting. Oh, woe is me. In comparison to the guys at Valley Forge, it makes me weep. Well, think about the jury system. It's an in-person participation. If you can mail in your jury experience, the Republic's lost, I guarantee you. There are some things that we've just got to start thinking about again. Maybe you have to opt in to get a mail-in ballot. Maybe you have to prove you're a military person that's serving overseas. Maybe you have to prove, or at least claim, that you're a homebound person. Make it the exception of the rule rather than the rule. And that's where we've got to go. I could talk for a few more minutes. I know my time's about up. I'm going to tell Lane to just quit looking at his watch. We've got this thing in the Constitution called the General Welfare Clause. Oh, that's about redistributing wealth, isn't it? Welfare. We hand out money, don't we? No. The United States Constitution prohibits the redistribution of any wealth, not to an individual, not to a city, not to a county, not to a state, not to a corporation, not to some tin-horn dictator in some foreign area. You cannot constitutionally take money and redistribute it. It has nothing to do with the dole. It has everything to do, the way the General Welfare Clause is used for stability and predictability. They were trying to get a government that was stable and predictable. No domestic violence. Nobody had to riot. No foreign invasion. No economic upheaval because we went with fake money from the Federal Reserve. Whatever, okay? We have completely abrogated the General Welfare Clause in the United States Constitution. But ours is to restore the confidence in the election process. so that stable and predictable thing can be reestablished. We got lots of other areas that needs to be reestablished. And all of these things about domestic violence and foreign intervention and the idea of economic upheaval, we got to, all of those things need to be addressed. But this election thing can be addressed if our local county people participate, if our state people participate. I was hoping we would have here tonight some state representatives that I could say, well, can we enlist you in this program? Okay? And we got to have our general government, our state, our local state and federal government people involved. It's going to take a process. We've all got to be involved. Every one of us has got to stay involved. We, the people, are the only reason we have got this disaster that we've got right now. Because we have walked away from our civic duty to participating as those that are preserving the blessings of liberty for ourselves and our posterity, as was asked for. Look, it's our job. It's our time. No one else can do it. Well, I hope we'll take the time from this to begin the process. We'll engage in this election. We'll try to help in this restoration. And this is just one little thing. One little thing. But it's so simple. It was changed from a 220-year success story in America by some lessers that sit in office and encourage it. I don't care who those lessers are, whether they were in our national government, whether they're in our state government, or whether they're in our county government, they blew it. And it's time to fix it. So I hope you'll be involved, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Scott. I certainly appreciate Scott's comments. He's very well educated on the principles of liberty. And he's right. We do need to get our state legislators involved in this process of changing that 800-page document that David raised up here. Okay, so one of our representatives from Cache County is already going down this road, but you know, Mike lives in the north end of the valley, so for those of you who live in Logan or in the south end, get those two representatives involved as well, because we need to have get back to the way we did it for 200 years, like Scott mentioned. Go to your local precinct, two people there that are election judges, probably already know you. You show them your ID anyway, because the statute did require it back in those days. And then you sign the voter roll that you showed up to vote, right? So then they know who actually showed up to vote on the voter roll. And then you cast your ballot, and it's counted right there in the precinct in 160 locations throughout this county. That's what we need. We've sacrificed election integrity for the convenience of casting a mail-in ballot. So it's our hope that we can get David elected and we can go down that road. So I think David has some yard signs here, if you'd like to take some yard signs with David. So we'd like to have you take one of those. And if you have any questions, David will be around. He can answer questions or whatever. And also Carlton. So if you'd like to ask questions of these candidates, you're welcome to do that. So thanks for your time and thanks for being here. Oh, we got to do the drawing for the quilt. Oh, you want me to draw it? Okay, I'll turn my head. Do a little mixing here. Let's see. Okay. This would be for Linda Stoll. Linda? Where's Linda? There she is. Linda gets the quilt. She bought enough tickets that her ticket was drawn for the quilt. So thank you again for donating that quilt, and thank you for those who purchased tickets to donate further to David's campaign.